this is Mike Forde from NASCAR Commons' dream. He's going to have the record amount of green flag passes in the history of Phoenix Raceway. So
he loves those stats.
Yes, he does.
Well, thank you, Denny, and welcome everyone to Hauler Talk, the latest edition. Coming off that Phoenix race with the option tires, it was my dream come true. There was lots of passing, all thanks to that option tire. It added to lots of the storylines. And to talk about it, I'm joined by my co-host, colleague, and friend, Amanda Ellis. Amanda, how are you?
I'm great. Great. Glad to be back for another week.
And NBCSports.com, NASCAR.com writer, Nate Ryan. Welcome, Nate.
Welcome, Forde and Amanda. I have two thoughts. One, I think Denny Hamlin preferred one fewer green flag pass in that race, as much as he was talking
fair.
up all the passing. Probably could have lived without the last one for the lead. And two, Jamie Mack. Forde loves those stats.
How about that?
You were like doing like loop data for him back in 2010 or something?
Potentially, maybe, yeah. His speed on the restarts or speed in turn 3 was outstanding, and I mentioned that in passing one time. I don't remember ever talking to Jamie Mack about the stats. That might have just been an off the cuff remark, as opposed to Chris Myers, who clearly had the "who the f is Mike Forde" face going on.
Mike Forde, Denny Hamlin's former crew chief. What's happening here?
I wondered how many fans actually thought that. But in fairness to Jamie Mack, we do have TV meetings every week. With our broadcast partners, and Jamie Mack is a part of those. So he is familiar with who Mike Forde is, and specifically with stats because of those meetings that we have with them, and often have a discussion on those calls about certain stats that may come up during the race. So I don't know if your phone was buzzing, but on Sunday when Denny gave you that shout out, it definitely was... one of those things that made its rounds because we know how much you and Denny love to chat about your love for stats, especially at a place like Phoenix.
Yeah, it did. And Denny was actually, his prediction did not come true. I did look it up after the race. It was probably middle of the pack for Phoenix races. I think a lot of that probably had to do with the strategies being similar for everyone, so it probably felt like there were a lot more passes than there actually were. You look at, Ryan Preece early on in the race was the only one on that strategy, and he plowed through the race. But if you through the field, but if you look at that, that's really only going to be 20 passes, say, and that's not going to add to the whole total. So it wasn't a record, but there were 2,200 passes, a little bit over that throughout the race. It was a record, not a record, but the most in maybe 3 or 4 races at Phoenix for green flag passes for the lead, which is lead changes all around the racetrack, not just lead changes. So credit to the option tire for that. I thought, personally, it was a game changer. A lot of the drivers said the same thing, and what they want is that tire to be that tire, to be the tire, and
the option tire, the softer tire.
Yeah, it seemed like that was the overwhelming opinion. And what I will say is that for the championship race, there will only be one tire. This is the third time we've had an option tire. We've done it in the All-Star race last year at North Wilkesboro. We've done it at Richmond last year in August, and then this is the third time. So we don't have any plans for an option tire, two different types of tires moving forward. But I do believe that for me personally, it's fun to watch. I don't know about you guys.
I love it. And I will admit, when we had Mark Keto on last week from Goodyear, I was surprised when he also said, hey, the point of this isn't to have an option tire every race weekend. We want to have one tire for the Phoenix Championship race. I had presumed that this could be a path forward for NASCAR, that you guys could have option tires every week. But Denny Hamlin actually also agreed with Mark Keto on his podcast this week and said, no, I just want one tire. And if you're a racing purist, I think I can kind of see that. I think there's probably going to be a lot of hardcore NASCAR fans that are probably pleased to hear that the championship race won't have an option tire because, and we heard Adam Stevens talking about it after Christopher Bell won the race, Stevens being Bell's crew chief, saying, it really puts an element of luck into it, that if you're a dominant team and the caution comes out at the end and you don't have a set of option tires and somebody else does, or the field does, you're in big trouble. So I get it, but I liked it. Like I wouldn't mind seeing it more often. I mean, maybe, I'm like Bianchi. I love chaos. Like maybe that's the appeal for me. And I see other series doing it. I mean, Formula One has option tires. Option tires, they have 3 compounds that you can use, I think, during every race out of 5. And IndyCar uses them on road courses. You have to use a softer tire at least once during the course of a race. But, of course, the difference is IndyCars use it once on an oval, but neither of those series run them on ovals. So, obviously, it's a different kind of paradigm here for NASCAR, where it's much more oval-based racing as opposed to road and street course racing like other series that use it.
Yeah, I think the opinions are split both within the walls of NASCAR and beyond in the industry. Some people say this is pretty fun, this is pretty cool, adds a little bit of a storyline. I thought Fox did a solid job, reporting throughout the race. You knew which cars had those tires on, and they focused on that storyline. It adds an extra dimension to the race. I thought that was pretty good. So that is going to be that was a storyline, and really the reason we did that. And for those who don't really want to do it moving forward, I think they feel like it might be a little bit gimmicky. And you can argue that point if you want, but the reason we do it is to add a real world data point. And we feel that the race conditions are so important to get that data. We've noticed in the past where, we can hold a test session to test out a part or piece, an aerodynamic piece to help the short track rules package. But one, you're probably only looking at 3 to 6 cars in that kind of scenario. Are they going all out? Are they trying to protect their car a little bit, so maybe not pushing it right up against the edge like they would in a race? So this helps us get some real world data. So that was part one of why we did it. And part two was we had a Phoenix tire test the day after. So we stuck around, 3 of the teams stuck around on Monday and had a tire test to really hone in on what we want to use for the championship race come November.
Yeah, and I have some information for the fans on that tire test that took place yesterday. 12 hours of testing in Phoenix. 3 teams, as Forde mentioned, were represented. From the Chevy perspective, it was RCR. The driver was Austin Dillon, and his crew chief, Richard Boswell. From the Toyota side, it was 2311 driver Tyler Reddick, and Eric Phillips. If you're familiar with the industry, Eric, and he led that test for 2311. And then from the Ford side, it was Wood Brothers. It was the number 21 with Josh Berry and his crew chief Miles Stanley. They were the 3 cars that were on site yesterday. Like I mentioned, 12 hours of testing. Goodyear did find 3 promising tire combinations from that test that I think we will continue to hear more about as they go back and look at the data. And I think one thing that's kind of interesting about tire tests, we do several a year, and you will often hear them references. Fans might have questions like, who's even at a tire test? So obviously we mentioned the teams and drivers that are attending, but from Goodyear, Mark Keto, who we had on last week, was there. Additional Goodyear engineers. Obviously, they have to have the mounting crew that helps mount the tires and help with some of the logistics throughout the test. From the NASCAR side, there were 5 members of our team that were there for the test. And then from the track side, there was 2 people that were kind of on point from Phoenix Raceway to help kind of do some of the normal procedures that are needed. In a test, a lot of times there were 12 combinations tested yesterday, and those are ran throughout the day. They're also ran in what is called short and long run. So a short run might be 25 laps. A long run is considered more of like a 50-lap stint. But, ultimately, there is a plan that Goodyear works on with NASCAR. They put into place. They run during those 12 hours, and they, run the short runs and the long runs so that they have, that data for different amounts of laps. But then also there were times where the track was cleared with the equipment that would kind of clear the track. And then there were times where the track wasn't cleared, so there was buildup and things like that left on. So they really do take a whole day, and they run a lot of different combinations, but ultimately they try to have different, simulate different race conditions as well, so that when they're capturing all the data and the things that are needed to kind of, hopefully use some of those combinations in the future, they feel like they have a good baseline to do that.
My goal always to get Mike Forde in trouble. Can you tell us anything then? And will we see these again? Option tires, is it possible? We know it's not going to be used in the championship race, but is it ruled out completely? I mean, Hamlin said he'd love to see you guys try it at a 1.5 mile track to come up with a new softer compound for a 1.5 mile track. Although he also said he thought this compound at Phoenix would work at 1.5 miles. So do you think we'll see more option tires this season?
Nothing is on the books yet, but whether or not we do have an option tire race is, I think it's on the table. I think we'd have to really put it through the team owner council. We'll have to discuss with them, driver council. We have councils for the drivers, team owners, and OEMs, and we meet with them regularly, at least once a month, and have those discussions of, all right, here's what we have planned, here's what we're thinking about. We also have a council and a regular meeting with the competition directors, so crew chiefs and competition directors for each team, where we let them know what we have planned, and also have a really open floor and open agenda of any things you want to talk about. And here's something that we're thinking about. What do you guys think about that? Yes or no? And we beat that up a little bit. So nothing is imminent right now, and not even discussed. At least nothing has come across my radar, which I'm not saying that is the end all and be all by any means, but usually, as I've said in the past, I am sitting in on most of the competition meetings, and things like that do get brought up, and they have not been brought up. So right now, no plans for an option tire this season, but that's not to say that won't change in the future, because we're always working to, if it makes sense, improve the racing. I think that's something we'll absolutely look at. So that is the tire discussion out of Phoenix. I think it was, as we said, a really interesting development storyline. And then as far as the officiating goes, we had a pretty interesting officiating conversation right off the bat, because of course we did. And that was Joey Logano's restart penalty pretty early on in the race at Phoenix. So what that penalty was he dipped below the painted line, the inside painted line, prior to hitting the start-finish line. And it was a bang-bang play, but per the driver meeting video and the rules for the race, that is communicated to each of the teams, that is a black and white penalty foul. So I believe we have the audio from the drivers meeting that explains exactly this particular rule that Logano violated.
For the initial start and for all restarts, stay in your lane until you cross the start-finish line. The front row establishes the lanes, and the inside lane must be established above the inside painted line.
Well, there you go. Thank you, Alex Weaver from NASCAR.com, for voicing our rules video. Does an outstanding job there. So that's the line. And so, when that happened, there was obviously a conversation, and Fox replayed it. And, Clint Boyer said, oh, that seems like a ticky-tack foul, one that we probably could have overlooked. So he's incorrect in that. This one is a black or white rule. It's not one where it's a judgment call. It's not balls or strikes. It's out of bounds or inbounds. So it would almost be like, Patrick Mahomes, he's a Kansas City Chiefs fan. It would almost be like Patrick Mahomes running for a touchdown, but his pinky toe stepped out of bounds. But he was going to get a touchdown, so just give him the touchdown. So that's how we look at it. That's not what actually happens in the NFL. If you step out of bounds, even so, the pinky toe, you're out of bounds, and the play starts over there. So that's how we look at that particular one. He did go below the painted line before the start-finish line, and unfortunately, it was a penalty for Joey, and he had a strong car, and was eventually able to make his way. Didn't even lose a lap, which was great to see for him, and was able to sort of get back into the race and even lead later on in the event. So that, thankfully, I want to say, was the only officiating dispute, controversy of the race.
And a change from the first 3 races of the season.
So there was no last lap caution. There were no track limits discussion. That one, when we started this podcast, we were Amanda and I are in competition communication. So our job is to explain the rules of the rules of the race, and give NASCAR's perspective for any calls that we make. That's part of it. So really what we root for every week is a really boring podcast. I'm not saying
you
this
don't.
one is especially boring because we have a lot of stuff to talk about outside of Phoenix's race. But if that was the only controversy, I'm personally okay with it. So we talked about the number of councils. So we got a OEM council, a team owner council, a driver council, and we also have committees. And one of the committees we do have is a steering committee, literally and figuratively, I guess. And it was started in September of 2022 when we had a rash might be too strong a word, of steering issues at Bristol.
So this is just to clarify, a literal steering committee as opposed to the figurative
That's what
steering
I'm saying.
committee.
Yes. Literal steering committee. It's a committee of folks who talk about steering. Does the fun ever start?
Yes.
Right. Why I bring that up is another topic that became part of the broadcast on Sunday was some of the steering issues we've seen and whether this is an epidemic in the Cup Series. And so I talked to Brandon Thomas, our VP of vehicle design, and got his input on this topic. And the three that we've seen that I've talked about with him we saw two in Daytona with RFK, and then we saw another one in Phoenix this past Sunday with the 45 of Tyler Reddick. So with the once we had the problems in Bristol 2 years ago, we did get a group together involving members of NASCAR, representatives from all three OEMs, several team reps, and folks throughout the industry from the teams that had significant power steering and hydraulic experience and significant vehicle assembly experience. And we really got together and met weekly, maybe more than that, several times a week to really beat up of, okay, what do we want to see here? What do we need to do to fix it? Did a bunch of research on the seals. We allowed some changes in that area and developed a new piston that addresses seal durability. There were a number of different changes that happened here. So part of the steering, the rack assembly, there are parts that are team sourced. So when you hear about the next gen car, often you hear it's a single sourced car. It's you buy it from suppliers, you get it, put it together, bring it to the racetrack. There are still some parts, seats, rear view mirrors, and parts of the steering assembly that are team sourced. The problems that were seen in Daytona and the problem with the 45 that was seen in Phoenix were both from team sourced parts. So the power steering line was the problem with the 45. That's not a single source part. The hose failed. There was a leak at the connector there that caused that's power steering to go in and out, according to the broadcast. And I think Tyler did talk about that after the race a little bit. Same thing with Roush, the RFK at Daytona. They had power steering pumps. That was an issue. That was an internal Roush issue. So I don't believe, we don't believe that there is an epidemic per se. It is something that as soon as it happens, we do talk to the teams, find out what the problem is, address it. If there are areas to improve, we absolutely will. We still have that steering committee, and we'll continue to talk about it if it does become more of a week-to-week issue. But from our vantage point, it does seem like more of a spot issue than a major significant problem that really our hair is on fire about. So that's kind of what we saw on the steering from the 45 at Phoenix.
So no steering committee meeting coming out of that prompted.
Correct.
This
That's
week.
right.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
No steering committee meeting. I think they meet regularly, but nothing that was a 5-alarm fire that we have to meet on Monday to really beat this up. This was something that was a team source part that seemingly failed in Phoenix.
So something else we discussed on last week's episode, Katherine Legge became the first woman in 7 years to make a start in the Cup Series, made her Cup debut at Phoenix. Did fairly well, I think. it was a little bit slow at the start of practice, but qualified a couple of tenths behind the car in front of her, which was, I think, showed that she got acclimated fairly well. And then, unfortunately, during the race, she had a spin early, no harm, no foul. And then she had a spin midway through the race in which Daniel Suarez ran into her car. And Suarez, on his YouTube channel, he was critical afterward that NASCAR had allowed Legge to race. He wasn't critical of Katherine Legge herself, but he made the point of saying that he felt like NASCAR needed to be more stringent in terms of approving people who have no experience. He mentioned Las Vegas this week, the speeds will be so high that he doesn't see how anybody with no experience could make their Cup debut there. But he also said, hey, I was going 100 miles an hour, trying to slow down when I hit her, and Phoenix is a fast racetrack too. So I want to give you guys the chance. I know we discussed Katherine Legge's qualifications and the approval process and how she was able to start this Cup race, but in the wake of those comments, if you guys have anything further to say.
Well, I do think before we kind of dive into Katherine's performance at Phoenix, I do want to say that if fans have any questions on kind of what that approval process is, we did address that in last week's episode. I encourage you to go back and listen to that. We won't necessarily dive into those nuts and bolts in this episode, but obviously, I encourage everyone to go back and listen. So, and like you said, Nate, I saw Daniel's comments as well, and when they were in the vlog, and I think, any driver who ends up in an accident is going to have frustrations, and often, they will voice those, and Daniel, I'm sure we'll have the opportunity to share those, at some point this week with the people that, are in the positions to take those comments from him. I will say for Katherine, I just want to take a minute to give her props for trying and going through the process and getting approved and having the performance, that she did on Sunday. I know it most likely didn't end in the way that she hoped. And look, people have, feelings about the approval process, and that is something that is often a point of discussion. And, look, people didn't necessarily agree that, one of Daniel's teammates were approved for Daytona, and it was a discussion during that time as well. So that is something that I think will always be a point of discussion. But I do trust, Chad Little, who's over that program. He's a former driver. He puts a lot of time and energy into those approval request and the process that is in place for a driver to receive, an approval or not. And as we mentioned last week, if Katherine wants to run again, she'll have to go through that process again, and they'll have a database now of notes that they will reference, and the decision will be made on, if she's approved for a future event. But I think, at the same time, not discounting Daniel's feelings or discounting his comments, I do think a lot of times after races, the frustration comes through in those comments. And also, it's cool for fans to get to see that too, right? Like, fans have a chance to go watch his vlog and see exactly how he felt in that moment. So I think those comments will most likely be discussed throughout the week, but I think, like I said, grateful he has the opportunity to share those with the people that would be in place to hear them.
Yeah, actually, I went and watched the entire vlog because I saw that snippet on social media.
I really didn't know he was really doing a vlog. I agree.
I would encourage everybody to check it out. It's like 22 minutes of behind the scenes with Daniel Suarez over 2 days with his wife Julia at Phoenix in the team, and it was really well done. And to your point, Amanda, he was hot. I mean, it was like right after the race. This is what he was saying, and then he was talking about it again after they got back to the Statesville airport and were driving home at 3 a.m. Like, the emotions were still raw. And I agree with you. I mean, that's why people follow your sport. That's why people follow NASCAR, is because they want that kind of unbridled passion, emotion. They want to see it, and you certainly saw it in that instance.
Yeah.
So as we saw throughout Phoenix, there were some pretty dynamic, fireworks, exciting last laps in each of the ARCA, Xfinity, and Cup Series races. And one in particular we wanted to talk about was the Alex Bowman, Eric Almirola finish. And fair or foul was what Almirola did coming to the checkered flag okay. And so we're going to talk about it a little bit briefly here from a NASCAR perspective. So here's how, from a NASCAR officiating perspective, we look at it. We look at what we did in the last lap of the Cup race at COTA. clean racing. I think Nate used the word sublime driving during last week's podcast, and I think that was a really good word for it. It was really, you could tell the talent from those three drivers of Bell, Byron, and Reddick. And then we look what happened at the end of the Cup race at Phoenix too, with Denny and Bell racing each other hard but clean. There was respect there. Obviously, they're teammates, so it's a little bit of a different story, but that was great to watch too. That was beautiful. And then you see what happened in the Xfinity race, and that's something we have seen for 77 years. Cars beating and banging to the finish line. And whether it was fair or foul, NASCAR is going to take a step back and not police that area. We can't officiate. We're not going to officiate in that area unless it's something that's over the line. You take what happened at Richmond last year with the 3, getting into the 22 and the 11. Obviously, we did step into that area, but something like that, racing hard for the win and not intentionally wrecking someone for the win, that's an area we'll look at as something that has happened for 77 years and really what made NASCAR as great as it is and as popular as it is. But it is going to be self-policing, and I believe we have a clip here of Alex Bowman and his comments after the race and how he felt about the move.
Fair or foul, how it ended ultimately?
I mean, I would have hoped that he would have given me a lane on exit, but he just exited like I wasn't there, which he was better than us for sure, but just tried to capitalize on that restart and trying to win the race and got shoved in the fence and the race car's destroyed. So bummer for that, but hats off to the HendrickCars.com crew. Everybody did a really good job. It's my first time working with Adam, and that was a lot of fun. Wish Mr. Hendrick had a win there, and it was just really loose in. I kind of melted the brakes off the thing behind the 7 earlier, the last run, and couldn't get it in the corner like Eric could. And I don't know if he had me arrow loose into one or if I just got loose myself. But I about spun out down there and figured my best bet was going to the outside there, trying to get off the corner. And there was no lane there anymore. So bummer, but you'll have that in big time auto racing.
So as I said, it'll be a self-policing situation, I feel like, in the future. If the shoe's on the other foot, I don't think you're going to see Bowman give Almirola an inch, and it's going to be fun to watch again. So,
as long as it does not include like a right rear situation, like that's the thing though. It's boys have at it within boundaries, right? Like
I think that's right. That's right. Yeah. Again, boys have had it was 3 senior VPs of competition to go, as we were talking about earlier.
I love Robin Pemberton.
He's the man.
Shout out Robin.
So I think that is a boys have at it moment, though.
Yes, I agree. I agree.
Versus what we saw in Coda with Austin Cindric and Ty Dillon. Despite what you may have heard, there was a penalty. That was a penalty that was issued. So that we look at these two certainly differently.
And I do think it is worth noting that this doesn't necessarily play into what you're saying, where a penalty may come or not. But this is 2 veteran drivers. I know it's the Xfinity series, but we're talking 2 very veteran drivers who spent many years racing against each other in the Cup Series. So they're familiar with each other's driving styles. And I mean, I don't have any concern about the 2 of them moving forward, but I do agree that if they show up together again in an Xfinity race anytime soon, I don't think Bowman will be given as much room there as he did. But again, they're familiar with each other, and they're both hard racers, and that's been proven in many races, both in the Cup Series and the Xfinity Series as well.
So that was the that's for the Phoenix Raceway race weekend. Lots to talk about. Believe it or not, I joked earlier that there was not enough controversy and there wasn't going to be much to talk about this episode, but we did a pretty good job. Nice job, everybody.
Probably talked more than we have about any other race.
Nice job.
So
very proud of ourselves. One off-topic item that happened before Phoenix, however, we do want to get into a little bit, and that was the appeal of the number 19 penalty of Joe Gibbs Racing and driver Chase Briscoe. As you have no doubt heard by now, that penalty was overturned. So it was a successful appeal for the number 19 team. So here's what goes into that process for the appeal. So let's go through the appeal in general terms. So as far as what actually happens in the room,
we don't know because we're not in there.
There is a little bit of a Las Vegas situation here. What happens in the room stays in the room per the rule book. Those are directions that have been given to the appellants and to NASCAR and the panelists. They're allowed to make a statement, and they started doing that probably a year and a half ago now, where they provide some reasoning for their decision, which I think is helpful for both parties and media and fans. So what happens is you have the appellants and NASCAR in a room. NASCAR opens the proceedings with some opening statements and why they chose to write the penalty. Go into the facts and figures of the situation, and depending on what exactly we're talking about, provide data, provide examples, provide video.
Sometimes show and tell props.
And in this case, there was show and tell props. They had the part on display. They go into things like, hey, we have done more, I think it was actually maybe 100 on the button, or very close to 100 teardowns at the R&D Center. This was the first time we saw this specific issue, which was part of our case of, hey, why, this is why we think that this was not a parts problem, but this was a modification, intentional. Then the appellant, in this case JGR, gives their side of the story. And really, it's not a time for a rebuttal of what NASCAR said. I'm sure that's kind of part and parcel with how it goes down. But they say, here's why we believe this penalty needs to be overturned. I don't know exactly what they said, but from comments prior from Dave Alpern, the president of JGR, on Sirius, and some of the statements they put, they say it had to do with it was a supplier issue and parts weren't bolting together perfectly well, so they went through that part of it. Again, these are all assumptions of what happened. I wasn't in the room, none of us were in the room, but my guess is that is probably what would happen. Then there is a break. And then they come back into the room. So 15-minute break, come back in the room. The NASCAR rebuts. So what they do is they say, well, what JGR said, this is our answer to those issues that they have brought up. And then JGR does the opposite. They rebut. And then NASCAR closes it out because the burden of proof is on NASCAR in this first level of the appeal. At that point, they all leave the room, and the three panelists a debate of they have deliberations on how they feel, and it has to be a majority decision. It doesn't have to be a unanimous. So if two of the panelists say the 19 should win and one say should NASCAR win, the penalty will be overturned. Doesn't have to be all three. And the panelists, a quick note for that, panelists are independent of NASCAR and the race teams. They are longtime industry figures. For instance, in this appeal, we had Kathy Rice, who was the former promoter at South Boston Speedway, for instance. Hunter Nickel was another one. He was a longtime executive, I think, president of Speed Channel, right? Yeah. Mm-hmm. And Dixon Johnson was the third. So they deliberate, and then they decide what they decide. In this case, they decided that the 19 was they did not violate the rules that were listed in the penalty notice, and that the penalty was completely overturned. Obviously, NASCAR disagrees with that ruling, respects the panel's decision, and respects the process. We have this in place for good reasons, so that things like if there are actual issues with the parts or pieces, that they have their day in court, if you will. It's not actual court. There's no Bible that you got to swear upon, but they have their time in front of this panel to plead their case. And I think if you listen to some of the comments from Briscoe, if you listen to Brad, if you go deeper and go to Brad Keselowski's comments about the appeal process when he was penalized in 2022, Denny Hamlin's when he was penalized in 2023, they all talk about the appeal process in really, I don't know if glowing is the right word, positive terms. It's a very fact-based and fair trial. So it's not a NASCAR, when you see headlines like NASCAR denies appeal of the JGR penalty, that's not NASCAR denying it. It's the appeal panelists who are denying it. So obviously we disagree. NASCAR disagrees with the ruling, but respect the panelists' time. They do not get paid for this. It is volunteer based. They give up their time because they care about the sport, and it's we really appreciate them and their time and them putting in this effort. And it's not an easy job because there's some technical penalties very deep into the data, and I think this was another one that I think when it started. I want to say it started at 9:30 in the morning, and I believe we didn't have an announcement until probably 2:30 that afternoon. Long day for those folks. So
we did feed the JGR team just so people don't think we.
They brought their entire team to the R&D center.
Yeah, just so people don't think we shove them in the back room and lock them in a room and take the key. And I don't want to give the wrong impression here, but
bread and water for 6 hours.
We give them some water. But we do feed them throughout the day, depending on how long the appeals take, and if that includes breakfast and lunch, and gosh, heaven forbid, dinner, if that's ever needed. Yeah. But ultimately, they are in a comfortable place, and they're in a place that they can meet and use the phone if needed. And if there are things they need, we do our best to within reason try to accommodate those. But we do feed them. We don't, to your point, Nate, throw them in a back room with only bread and water.
They got it better than the media did back in the R&D appeals stakeout days, which I'm very glad are gone.
Oh,
but
me too. You and me both.
15 years ago. I'm not even going to touch those. I do have one question, though.
Before you get to that question, another side note, funny anecdote about the lunch. So my office is right next to the conference room where the teams congregate, the appellants congregate to discuss their case and things like that. So the day that Denny Hamlin appealed his penalty for wrecking Chastain, got the big fine, my door is open and he comes back with 2 boxes of Jason Deli sandwiches. And he goes, "Hey, Forde, you want some lunch? It cost me $75,000. Which I was like, all right, you got me on
well
that
done,
one. Well done, Denny.
No wonder he's calling you on national television.
Yeah.
You guys have a bond. There's clearly a connection.
Well, that's what's funny. I think fans think I'll text them and say, we got this WWE heel babyface thing, and I'm the heel.
Always.
And it's kind of fun to play off, but we actually do have a decent relationship.
So here's the question.
Yes. In
the past, I think the Hendrick penalty, when they won the appeal 3 years ago, there was rule book language that was modified after that. Is NASCAR planning on modifying any sort of language or rules based off of losing this appeal?
No, we are not. That's a great question. So oftentimes there are rules, and we talked about this when we talked about the 75 penalty for the Truck Series with your boy Parker Kligerman. We won that, of course, but that process that we talked about, that was the problem area, was a new process because of an appeal that NASCAR lost in 2022 to the number 88 truck. And we realized that there were some issues in the post-race heights and how we did that, so we made some changes there. I don't know if they were rulebook changes, but procedural changes. And like you said, Hendrick, same deal, made some changes there as well. Because when we lose appeals, so let me back up. When we write a penalty, I will say this, we are very sure that a violation was made. There's not really any time where we're like, I think they broke the rules here, but I'm not sure. Let's just write the penalty and we'll see what happens. We are very sure that a rule was broken. So that's why I think
the teams are called and discussions continue before a penalty is leveled.
Oftentimes they'll come down.
It's not like they got a notification via phone. I mean, they do eventually get a notification, most likely via phone. But there are conversations that have taken place in between that time.
To make sure that when you guys issue the penalty, you feel 100% about it.
Yeah.
It almost sounds like
we'll give them the benefit of the doubt. Yeah. So we'll have them down. I'm not sure who we had down from JGR, but we'll have Chad Knaus down, take the Hendrick penalty, for instance. We'll have Chad Knaus down to the R&D center and say, Chad, this is what we found. we're willing to listen to explanations here, but this is pretty clear to us. And they say what they say, and if we feel that that is a plausible reason, we will say, okay, well, we're keeping this part, and we'll move forward. But more often than not, we'll say, not really buying that. Here's your penalty. So
and we do have a collection of Chad Cannell's parts.
Yeah, we have a room in the R&D Center with illegal parts that probably Chad has made some donations to, for sure.
Sounds like a story I'd like to write.
Yeah.
You know what?
Can you find me the window deflector from the 2006 Daytona 500 qualifying?
I'm sure it's up there.
It's probably tagged.
I'm sure
Every part up there is tagged, and it is actually jokingly known, at least between our group, as the Chad Cannell's room, for sure.
Right.
Yeah.
So, but long way of answering your question. So there are not going to be any rule book changes. If you heard Brad Moran, the NASCAR Cup Series managing director on SiriusXM NASCAR Radio, the morning drive Tuesday morning, he was asked a similar question to that. But what he said was, if we see this exact same thing moving forward, we'll write another penalty. We still feel this is an illegal part, whether they modified it. So what we say they broke the rule was they modified the part. They say they didn't modify the part. It's still an illegal part in our eyes, whether they modified it or not. It's still in NASCAR's possession, for instance. So if we see this part moving forward in the future that has the same exact infraction to it, or the same, the holes are elongated to it, then we will likely write a penalty. So we don't feel that this was something that we'll allow moving forward.
Yeah, and I also think it's important to note, Forde kind of touched on this earlier, but it is important to note, just for fans' knowledge, that if a team encounters a problem during assembly or something of that nature, they have the ability. I mean, there's a process in place of how to notify NASCAR of that, and to make those phone calls and to share, like, we're having trouble here, or having frustrations here. I don't, have the context to what that looks like on the team side per se, but I do know on the NASCAR side, that is in place if needed. Teams can call and say, we are having trouble with this specific part. Can you guys help us, or can you, help us know, like, if other teams are having trouble with that or something of that nature. Those phone calls are always allowed. Correct?
Absolutely. Yeah, for sure. And we're happy to help them. So I believe that is a wrap on last week. Hopefully you guys all enjoyed the Phoenix Raceway events, going to Las Vegas Motor Speedway this weekend. First mile-and-a-half race. That's Next Gen Car has been a star on these types of racetracks, so hopefully we see more of the same. Triple header weekend with the Truck Series on Friday evening, and then Xfinity Series on Saturday afternoon, and then the Cup race
Christopher Bell win 4
Sunday.
in a row? The thing is, I think he can.
Showing some exclusive
he's the heavy favorite
right
in the sports books.
For sure.
So speaking of rules, regulations, inspections, our guest today is Jason Burdett. He is the NASCAR Xfinity Series Director of Technical Inspection. He goes into his career. He's been on the team side, on the Cup side with Hendrick Motorsports, moved over to Xfinity side with Junior Motorsports. Really long and varied and successful career on the team side. And this year he's joined NASCAR as the technical inspector, the lead inspector for the Xfinity Series. So he gives his perspective on his career and moving to the quote-unquote dark side and really using his vast experience on the team side to really help keep the garage level playing field in the Xfinity Series. So he gives a lot of good stories, a lot of good information. So please stick around for Jason. Great interview from Jason Burdett, the NASCAR Xfinity Series Director of Technical Inspection. Okay, we're now joined by this week's guest, and that is the Director of Technical Inspection for the NASCAR Xfinity Series, Jason Burdett. Jason, welcome to Hauler Talk.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
So let me explain some of the dominoes that fell for Jason to come and join us here at NASCAR. So a lot of you have probably remember Wayne Auton, the longtime NASCAR Xfinity Series managing director. Well, he retired at the end of 2024. And Eric Peterson, who was previously the director of technical inspection for the Xfinity Series, replaced him as the managing director. And so that left open a spot for Jason to come in and replace Eric. And Jason, just for our fans, what is the director of technical inspection for the Xfinity Series? What goes into that job? What do you do on a day-to-day basis, and then especially on the race weekend?
Basically on the weekends, my job is we have a crew of 14 full-time inspectors that travel with us to every race throughout the season, and then a bunch of part-time guys that kind of fill in when we need them at different times. So it's basically to manage those 20, 21 people on a weekend to make sure the cars are meet all the rules and all that fun stuff that nobody likes, but we're just trying to.
Nobody likes, but super important.
Yeah. I mean, for a long
took this job.
For a long time, I really didn't like them, right? But for this, I mean, it's been a lot of fun, and I've learned a ton about both sides of the sport now, rather than just one.
Well, the best part is, I was thinking about it. Eric Peterson, who's now the managing director, as I said, was in that job. And prior to joining NASCAR, Eric was with Roush Racing during all those successful years, winning championships in the Xfinity Series. So he knew probably a lot of the gray areas to work in. So when he left that role, I'm sure the garage was kind of like, yes, nailed it. We don't have to deal with that guy anymore. Then you walk in the door and ruin everything.
Yeah, right.
So we'll get into that and why you're ruining everything, because you know the job so well, because you have such a long history in that. And Amanda, I know you have his resume sort of off the top of your head.
Yeah, no. I mean, Jason, you've been around the garage area for quite some time, working with, drivers such as Jimmy Johnson, Jeff Gordon. Obviously, you spent a long tenure at JRM with Justin Allgaier. And I'm sure, a few other drivers fall into that, conversation as well. Like, before we dive too deep into what you're doing today, can you, tell our fans a little bit of kind of what your racing history is and really why you were qualified for this position when it became available?
So basically, my career in NASCAR started in 1995. So I'm coming up on I guess this is 30 years for me, in the garage, either the Cup Series or the Xfinity Series. So it's been a long time, and I've been very fortunate to work with some amazing people. I worked at Robert Yates Racing when Dale Jarrett was at the top of his game, and as we kind of declined at RYR as well. But I was there when Dale was great, and Ernie and Ricky Rudd and some really amazing drivers. And Robert himself was an incredible person and great to work for. And I think at that time I was 17, 18 years old. So to be surrounded by people like Robert Yates, Doug Yates, Todd Parrott, and that whole group was amazing, right? To help me, kind of guide me in a direction of where I wanted to go, and then. From there, I moved on to Hendrick, first with the 24 in 2000, and I guess it was 2001 when Jeff won his championship, or his last championship, I guess. I was on that team as we were prepping. They were actually, at that point, we were prepping to start the 48 in 2002. I think we ran 3 or 4 races in 2001 with Jimmy toward the end of the year. And then we were getting ready for 2002 to fire off the full season with Jimmy, and then eventually Chad come on and we started that whole group. So I've been a part of a lot of really great teams with great drivers, really great crew chiefs. Guys to work for, like I mentioned, Chad, Knaus, Todd Parrott, Stevie Letarte. Him and I were friends for a long time. We both kind of started at the same time and grew up together in this sport. It's kind of funny. We were best men in each other's weddings. We lived together, and we, for a long time, we were on completely opposite sides, right? Like he was the 24, I was on the 88, and as much as rivals you have in racing, we were probably at that time as high as we could get, and then we'd leave and we'd go home and we'd watch TV. Yeah, so it was a lot of fun. But and then obviously through the Hendrick years, and then I ended up working on Dale Jr.'s Cup car with the '88, and Stevie was the crew chief, and I was the car chief at that point. And as Stevie moved on to do the broadcasting thing, it gave me an opportunity to move over to JRM with Dale's team on the Xfinity side. And the first year was Regan Smith. We had a good year. We won 2 or 3 races that year with Regan, and then Justin came in for the next 6 or 7 years. I think we were together and we won a bunch of races, made the Final Four 4 or 5 times. Unfortunately, last year he did get it done, which was great for him. But unfortunately, we couldn't do it when we were together. But it's been an incredible journey and a lot of fun.
And from working with Stevie the past 10 years at NBC, I've certainly heard the name Jason Burdett a lot. But I want to go back even farther, Jason, in the DJ years, the 99 championship years, were you the car chief then?
No,
Oh, okay.
I was. I would have been a tire guy.
Tire guy
in
then,
'99.
okay.
Yep. I was. I'd started in '95. I worked for a small little team in '95 and '96. Was Diamond Ridge Motorsports. And actually, Elliott Sadler, Steve Grissom drove it when I first started, and then Elliott came to drive the Busch car at that time. And then starting the '97 year, I moved over to RYR on the '88, and so '97, '98, '99, I was tire guy. 2000, I moved to mechanic.
Okay, gotcha. Because I feel like, I started covering NASCAR full time around 2002, and I feel like that was around the time I first heard the name Jason Burdett. Is that like, hey, this guy's an up and comer. This guy's going to be a crew chief. But it was really interesting to me to tie this back to Stevie Letarte. He told me that when he got into TV in 2015, he left the crew chief job at the number 88, and you had this position come up with JRM to become a crew chief for the first time after you'd kind of been mentioned for pretty much a decade.
Yeah.
Like this could be a leap for you. I remember Stevie saying, like, you're not an engineer. He saw all the engineers becoming crew chief, and he was like, this is your shot. So you took that leap.
Well, the 88 group that we had there right as Stevie was leaving was, with Dale, and Dale is an incredible person too, right? To spend time with and get to know, and he's a lot of fun, and so we had a really tight knit group, and then obviously with Stevie leaving, Dale knew that my aspirations, what they were, and Ives was coming in from JRM, so it was kind of the perfect opportunity for me to move over there and get an opportunity on the crew chief side, and luckily, I don't know if we made the most of it, but we had a good run and a lot of success through the years.
And now you're here with NASCAR, which is kind of continues a bit of a trend that the competition department has been trying to make and evolve into that, of bringing experts and people of your caliber from the team side over to NASCAR. Scott Miller, John Probst, Jay Fabian, folks like that, and now you, Jason. Was that a hard decision? I joke about coming to the dark side, but was leaving the team side and moving over to NASCAR a tough decision, or was that something that you always in the back of your mind said, maybe this will be kind of cool?
No, I think I've always thought it would be kind of cool. So, funny story. My parents worked for NASCAR long time ago.
Oh, wow.
So my dad was part-time, obviously. I grew up in New York State, right? So they did a lot of the northern races.
That makes half the room right now. Grew up in New York. I love it.
Yeah, so he did part-time stuff. He helped in the tower and stuff with Mike Helton and those guys. And then my mom, she worked in scoring. I think all the names, it's been a long time, but like Morris Metcalf ran scoring at that time, right? So she did a lot of stuff in scoring, and then I think eventually she went full time in the trailer for the passes,
like credentials,
credential trailer,
yeah.
She went full time, worked in the credential trailer for probably 6 or 7 years or something, until she finally was like, okay, I've had enough flying all over the place, and retired or stayed home. But so, I've always known everybody from NASCAR. Obviously, being in the garage, you know everybody. But then, from early on when I was a kid, I got to meet a lot of people and know. So it was never something completely off the radar for me. I think, the racing side is getting tougher and tougher the competition side. Every year, it gets a little harder, and I think you've brought up, right? I'm not an engineer, right? So my projection had kind of leveled off, I think, right? Like I had got to where, Xfinity crew chief, I could do that, right? And I could probably, and on the truck side, I could always find a home in Xfinity or truck. I felt like moving on for a while, but to ever have the opportunity on the Cup side, I kind of felt like that's probably not going to happen. Not in the cars. Not a true opportunity. Where you could go and have an opportunity to win races or a championship. So when this came available, I've been friends with Jay for a long time. Fabian, our kids raced quarter midgets and stuff together. Him and I were just talking one day about potential for this, and I thought, this might be great, right? Like I've been 30 years on the competition side. I have a pretty good idea how that side of the world works, and if I can spend, if I was lucky enough to spend 30 on this side and learn about the how an actual race is run and how it's put on, it would be a lot of fun, to learn a new side of it.
So you're speaking about like kind of coming over and learning the new side, and I know that you've only had a few weeks here under your belt because we're kind of still early in the season, but are there things that you've experienced or seen that maybe necessarily aren't shocking, but just things where you're like, oh, I wouldn't have necessarily known that because I was on the other side, versus now having a seat at the table on the NASCAR side?
It's funny, after Daytona and Atlanta were both pretty calm, right? Because we don't practice, we don't do those things. You just kind of show up, qualifying race, right? And it was a whirlwind, right? Because I had no idea really what I was supposed to do or where I was supposed to be or go or whatever, right? Like, so I think COTA, after practice at COTA, on the competition side or the team side, you're so focused on your car, what your driver's saying, right? And your view might broaden a little bit to 5 or 6 other guys that you're going to be racing, or for a win, or for with Justin on the Xfinity side, we were always thought we had an opportunity to win pretty much everywhere we went. So, you were always just watching 4 or 5 guys that you knew you had to beat that weekend. The rest of the field you didn't really pay a lot of attention to, right? So I didn't know half the stuff that goes on, there was cars that had issues through practice and this and that, and it's crazy because I'm sure it's always happened, and I had no idea any of this was going on, right? Like I was just worried about our stuff at that. So it's been eye-opening, right? And there's so many little intricate things that go into putting a race on and making sure that the teams have all the information that they need and all that stuff so that they can do their job and not have to worry about things that are happening at the track or whatever, right? Where we take care of all that. So, the learning curve is pretty steep at the moment, but it's been a lot of fun.
So is part of that adjustment when you didn't know what was going on in those other sectors of the garage? You work for Junior Motorsports, powerhouse team in Xfinity, Hendrick, powerhouse in Cup, Robert Yates Racing at his peak. You hadn't really worked for teams that were probably like mid-pack or further back in the pack. Right. So is that sort of the adjustment of learning what they're dealing with?
Yeah. It's the challenges that those guys face on a weekly basis is they go through a lot just to get to the track. We did a lot of shop tours over the winter, right? Just going and meeting with different teams, and Eric taking over a new position and myself in a new position. We just wanted to get out and and meet some of the team managers and crew chiefs and some of the car chiefs and different people involved with the teams. And, you get to go to these shops and you see the challenges that they're facing. When you watch TV, all the cars look good, right? They have a fresh wrap on them. They're this and that. But the hours and the time that those guys spend behind the scenes getting ready to go and struggling for parts off of this car to go on that car, and we need this to go to that, and a lot of that stuff. So, it's been eye opening, and it's been a lot of a whole new appreciation for what everybody in the industry has to deal with on a week-to-week basis. Like you said, I've kind of been on the privileged side of the competition part for most of my career, so I didn't really realize a lot of the stuff that they go through.
Is there anything you can do though to help them per se, or is it because your job is to be impartial and objective? So is it like you need to learn what their struggles are, but not necessarily say, hey, I can make your life easier by doing this, and this?
I don't know that there's. I guess I'm still trying to figure out where I would fall into that, or where that falls into. I think, from our standpoint at this point, it's still everybody's got to have an equal playing field when they get there. They got to know that whether you're a car that runs in the top 5 every week or a car that runs 25th every week, that you have the same opportunity and the same rules for everybody when they show up and go on the track. So I don't know what you could do to help them. Other than try to give them advice maybe or something. If that came up,
and just know where they're coming from.
Yeah. Exactly.
Well, it's funny you kind of tell that story because I'm going to steal Amanda's story here a little bit, but why don't you tell it? The Scott Miller quote about it's exactly what you're saying. It's pretty wild.
Yeah. So when Scott came over, I don't remember exactly what this point was in his career here, but he was obviously in the competition role, and one day he kind of came by my office and I said, well, I've been meaning to ask you just, obviously you've been here a couple years, and I was like, what, is there anything that you can, reference the fact that when you're on the team side versus you've been in the NASCAR side, a couple years, what is something that someone doesn't maybe always understand from going from one to the other? And he said, well, when you're on the team side, you're kind of worried about your team, your driver, your organization. He said, if you have a multi-car organization, you might be worried about 3 to 4 cars. Then you might be worried about a manufacturer teammate or someone who's within your manufacturer. But he's like, outside of that, he's like, you don't really worry about anything, other than that. And he said, here you're required to worry about everybody.
Yeah.
And he referenced kind of just what you just said, that that's one thing about when you make that jump is you kind of realize the magnitude of worrying about all the teams and all the drivers and all the organizations and all the struggles and maybe even the successes that come with that. But it's always been something that I've enjoyed talking with him about is how you kind of go from a mindset that is worried about 1 to 2 things, not necessarily 1 to 2 things that you have to do, just 1 to 2 teams or drivers or whatever you might be or might be in charge of at the time, to when you come over to the NASCAR side, it's an immediate. The moment you walk through the door, you're required to worry about everybody. Mm-hmm. And I don't know that everyone kind of, unless you've walked in those shoes, I don't know that everyone kind of understands that,
Yeah, no, it's definitely a different viewpoint, which is, I knew that coming in, it was going to be a different viewpoint. I just, there's so many things that as you go through, you being a reporter, right? You think, why do they do this? What is this for, right? And there's been...
It's probably our most asked question by fans, too. Why does NASCAR do...
Yeah, there's so many little things that happen throughout a year or several years, and you're always like, why do we open the garage now? Why do we do this? So to be on this side of it now, you're like, okay, I understand a little bit now why it's that way, right? Yeah. The officials, the the amount of officials, the truck guys helping Xfinity helping Cup, swapping back and forth and around, trying to orchestrate all of that so that everybody has enough people. So this is when you're going to qualify. This is when your practice and qualifying is, trying to make all that match and work. It doesn't always seem like it makes sense when you're on the other side. But then when you really sit down and look at it, it's like, oh, okay, I understand now why it's been this way for a while,
Has there been an instant in this young season where you used some of the know-how in inspecting, where you found something that you're like, I used to do that? No, you're not allowed to do that. Any you don't have to name any cars or any names like that, but anything like that where you're like, nah, this is why they hired me, because I was able to catch X.
There hasn't been. It's been pretty quiet to start the season off here. I mean, I think. Like you said, Wayne and Eric and Jason Brownlow, who's the assistant series director, they've done a really, really solid job the last 6-7 years, however long that group's been together. And I was a part of that on the other side, but they've done a really good job of managing it, and everybody kind of knows. Not a lot's changed in the Xfinity series in the last little bit, right? So everybody knows the areas they've worked in. They've exhausted some of them just because they've worked on them, but also because maybe budgets keep you from pushing further in certain areas, right, and doing things. So, I mean, a lot of things are just little things that you're trying to keep everybody equal and on the same playing field.
Playing off Forde's point, you not only know the cars, but you know the people. You talked about it like there's 5 or 6 teams you're looking at each race weekend. I'm sure Gibbs was on that list. RCR cars are on that list. And now you're overseeing all those people, and I'm sure you have pre-existing relationships, some of which were probably forged in some fiercely competitive times. What's it like moving to that other side of the fence? What's the reaction like from guys who you raced hell-bent for leather for victories against, and now you're officiating them? Like, how do you manage and maintain all those relationships?
Yeah, I think it's been really good. I mean, I think when you've been around as long as I have, right? There's guys, not on every single team, but there's guys pretty much everywhere that I've worked with, whether it be a Hendrick or even JRM or years ago at Yates, right? I've worked with a lot of the guys at some point or another, not just against them, but with them, So, and everybody, spreads out every year. Everybody moves around and gets to a different spot that they hope is better for them. So it's been good because I think, like we've talked, I think the respect that the majority of everyone has for the things that I had done right in the past. I try to be a pretty good person, right, and friendly to everybody, right. So I feel like I've made a lot of friends throughout the time on the competition side, and now that I'm on this side, I feel like it's been pretty easy sailing, right. Like we've had a few instances of, hey, can you fix this, or hey, can you fix that, and there's not a lot of bantering back and forth or anything, there's not a lot of arguments. Like, just everybody on the Xfinity side for sure has been really easy to work with and solid to do this with.
So one thing fans may not realize is in your role, so the managing director of the series, which is obviously we reference, is Eric Peterson. Eric's in the tower during the race, and then at the end of the race, once the race is completed, obviously, typically, there's X amount of cars parked on pit road. You guys have inspection. Fans may not realize that it's actually your role to kind of start inspection and get inspection kind of, moving in the right direction, so to speak. And obviously Eric will eventually make his way back down into the garage. And if you guys need to connect on anything, you will. But you're really in charge of kind of the after race procedures and kind of tearing down of the race winner and how that, kind of transpires in the garage. Talk a little bit about kind of how, in some ways, unless you were in victory lane, your job stopped. unless you were tearing down or in victory lane, I should say, your job kind of stopped as a crew chief when you were done at the race. But now, it really kind of kicks into high gear for another hour or 2 hours, depending on how long inspection is. Just talk a little bit about, fans may not quite understand always what goes on in inspection, but kind of how you guys tear down multiple cars at one time. And, you have officials obviously in those places watching those cars and helping the mechanics and the team members do that. But just give them a little bit of an overview of like what a post-race from pit road to garage looks like.
Yeah, so, I mean, essentially our formula to this point has been, we capture the top 10, right, for media, and so that the media has a chance to talk to all those drivers and any random people that may have had a good day gone bad. I think at Coda Quapple, right, had a great day going, did an incredible job, and then a flat tire at the end derailed his good run. But we, obviously captured him so he could have his shot with the media afterward, and then from there it's basically the top 5 and then one random car that we pick out of the field. We send them through. We do the OSS body scan, mechanical and body scan, because we have mechanical measurements you have to meet post race to make sure everybody's inbounds there. Scan the body to make sure nothing's moved, shifted, or changed too much. And then they go on to heights and weights, where we check the heights, post-race heights, and the weight of the car. And then usually it's the top. The winner obviously gets tore down.
Sure.
In second place is usually in that list too, and then there's a third kind of random car, just depending on if we've seen something, or if somebody was super dominant all day and had a bad pit stop at the end, we might want to take a look at them and just make sure everything jives, post race. But as far as what we do in tear down and post race, that's the officials. Like I said, there's 14 of them, right? There's a couple lead guys that we lean on a lot. They run Andy Ashback does the engine side for the Xfinity. Jason Koval does a lot of the chassis inspection stuff at the track on the chassis platform. I lean on them to just like, hey, have you seen something this weekend that we need to particularly look at? And then we kind of compile the list of what we'll do for tear down that week of usually three cars.
I have one more to close. Anyone else?
No, you can go ahead. Yeah.
So Jason, the name of this podcast is Hauler Talk, so I have to ask, have you ever gotten called to the hauler to be chewed out by Wayne?
Yes.
What was it for?
Well, I mean, there was a few instances. There was a couple that I probably was in trouble for, and then there was a couple times. There was one weekend, I think Justin and maybe Ross Chastain got into it, Watkins Glen, one year, and then the next week we all had to go and talk about how we weren't going to do that anymore. Which that really wasn't me. I was just
you were just there for support.
Yeah, I was there, I guess, to maybe reiterate it later on. I don't know, but no, I had my fair share of talks with Wayne.
Apparently the Wayne ones were epic.
Yeah. No, Wayne was always good to me, which I didn't have a lot of issues, but he was always super good, and everybody was always good. There's sometimes the line is fuzzy, and you don't feel like you've crossed it, but they do, right? So you just kind of live through those and keep moving. But
well, that's your life now.
Yeah.
So.
Well, yeah. You said it's been quiet so far this season, but I'm sure at some point you'll be in the hauler in one of those. Have you thought about what that discussion will be like with a rule breaker?
Yeah, no, I've thought about that. I feel like it's amazing how your mentality does change quickly, though, right? Like I feel like for all those years, I was always begging for forgiveness, right? Or, just we need a little bit. That's all we need. If you just give us this little bit, we'll be good forever, right? We'll never do that again. And now you're on the other side of it, and it's like, no, I know that's not how this works. I know if I give you a little today, next week it's going to be twice that, and then it's just going to keep multiplying, right? So your mentality definitely changes pretty quickly when you get on this side of the fence.
Well, Jason, a lot of people say that the NASCAR Xfinity Series is the best racing in NASCAR, and you're an important part of that. So, love that you're here with us at NASCAR. Welcome. A little late on that one, but you're going to kill it. Appreciate you coming onto the podcast, telling about your career and what you're doing now, and really looking forward to working with you for many years to come, hopefully for all of us. So, thank you so much for joining us, Jason.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Well, appreciate Jason for all that insight, really cool stories, really cool career. I didn't realize he was in the sport for that long. He's a young-looking dude. I'm pretty jealous of him. So good for Jason. Appreciate his time today. And now we move on to fan questions. We've gotten a couple here or there, so appreciate everyone sending their fan questions. Again, send it over on X to my account. I am at mforde, MFORDE. Amanda Ellis, Amanda M. Ellis on X, and then Nate Ryan on Facebook, Nate Ryan's journalist page. Please send any questions you may have, even if it's not topical to the race weekend, anything that's on your mind, we'd love to ask or answer. So one of the questions we got on X was from Elizabeth, and she had such a long thought-out questions. Really appreciate this. She actually wrote a note and then screen grabbed the note and posted it on X. Good for you, Elizabeth. I really appreciate it. And she wanted to talk about the Cindric penalty and really specifically what Kyle Busch and Door Bumper Claire, the host of the podcast Door Bumper Claire, insinuated. So Kyle Busch insinuated on two different occasions that a certain quote-unquote last name influenced the outcome of the penalty. And then I believe Tommy Baldwin may have referenced something similar. Didn't really go into it exactly what he's saying, but that maybe the decision has changed overnight. Maybe insinuating that a phone call may have been placed or we were influenced by an outside party in any way. I can unequivocally say that is not the case. It has nothing to do with Austin's last name, which is Cindric. Also, the last name of Tim, who is a president, high-ranking executive over at Team Penske. Roger Penske, Tim Cindric, Walter Nacke, zero phone calls were placed to the NASCAR offices to try to lobby for a quote-unquote lesser penalty or away from a one-race suspension. That did not happen. This was purely a NASCAR decision. We went into the reasons why last week. So hopefully that puts that to bed. Has nothing to do with his last name. We just clearly how we saw it in comparison to previous right rear hooks of Chase Elliott and Bubba Wallace. So we viewed those three instances differently and made the call that we made. So that is the answer to that, Elizabeth. Thank you so much for that question. Appreciate you listening, and keep the questions coming. And Amanda has one more fan question, or really I guess it's not a specific fan question, but a topic of conversation that has been going on for about the last week. Another rumor we can unequivocally put to bed.
Yeah, so if you were, kind of on X this week or kind of paying attention to the conversation, there was a post that implied, a post that was not true, but implied that NASCAR would not be making the trip to Mexico City like we had previously announced, and would not be, hosting that race in the summer. And the answer to that is not true. NASCAR is still 100% going to Mexico City. The teams are preparing to go to Mexico City. NASCAR is preparing to go to Mexico City. In fact, we just got back about a week ago with a group of drivers who were there to promote the launch of ticket sales. And also we just had the Mexico City team at COTA and spent a lot of time with them. And I believe they'll make, possibly another trip or so to a NASCAR race before the summer event. But just want to make sure fans know and understand that was simply a rumor. Someone made a post that looked official, but it wasn't official. And we are 100% still making that trip to Mexico City in June.
So get your tickets, NASCARmexico.com. You can use them, and we'll use them because we're racing in Mexico City.
Yes.
So that is our show. Appreciate everyone tuning in, downloading. Please download, subscribe, rate, review. We got to get those ratings up. We got a couple 1 stars there in the past couple weeks.
Don't look
I got
at the
called out a
ratings.
couple times.
Mainly because Amanda
Don't
keeps
read the
blaming the
reviews.
teens for stuff that we did. So if she could just bite her tongue every now and then, we might be able to get a 2-star rating and get that up a little bit. So appreciate everyone listening in, and enjoy the races at Las Vegas. Truck Series race on Friday evening, Xfinity on Saturday afternoon, and then the big show, NASCAR Cup Series race on Sunday. Las Vegas Motor Speedway, the first intermediate 1.5 mile race of the season show. That's where the next gen car has really shined, so hopefully it's another good one, and you enjoy the show. Thanks, everybody.
All right. Thanks, guys. See you next week.